This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, unburdened with duties, and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm and wise and skillful, not proud and demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove, wishing in gladness and in safety. May all beings be at ease. Whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, the medium, short or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born, may all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another. Even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings, radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, upwards and unbounded, free from hatred and ill will, whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, free from drowsiness. One should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding. By not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, being freed from all sense desires, is not born again into this world.
All right, Ajahn, thank you. Over to you.
Okay. Well, one of the great benefits of meditation is not just to have a more peaceful life. That's a huge benefit. But one of the great rewards is understanding the mind, understanding how we work, how we tick. And this has great benefit in a practical sense, in our day-to-day living, as well as in broader family life, in work life, society. It has huge advantages. So it's much like, here we go, here's a strange topic for you, going into a big supermarket or a hardware store. The first time that we go into a store like this, we're looking around and it's kind of, we're not really sure where things are, where to go. We've come for a reason, we've got our shopping list, but we don't really know where to find things. But the more we continue going through this store, we start to work out where things are. We start to become a bit more familiar with the layout of the aisles and where things are found. And that's much the same in meditation. When we start off meditating, we don't really know the layout of our mind at all. And it can kind of seem a bit daunting. We're sitting there and what are we supposed to do? This is one of the great sort of challenges that really takes off meditation practice. That when you start meditating on your own, now you're really starting to be alone with your mind and you have to find out how it all works. So as we proceed in life, in our store, in our hardware store, and our supermarkets and grocery stores and everything else, we start to realize there's actually a logic to how these things work. And that logic doesn't immediately make sense. So if we're in a grocery store, we might look, when we're looking for frozen peas, for example, they'll be with things like ice cream and pastry and other frozen things, but not where the fresh peas are. And you start to find that things are there for a certain reason. They work for a certain way. In a hardware store, for example, the tomato seeds are not anywhere near where you'd find tomato plants. And it's there for a logical reason. But it takes a while to start working out what these logical reasons are. But that's where it really starts to come together. And it's huge benefits for that is when we start to learn how to, in our own mind, work out the subtle logic of the mind, how things come up. You're sitting there meditating, having a great time, and all of a sudden you're just overwhelmed with thoughts and feelings, and it's like, where did this come from? What are we supposed to do with this? And straight away, learning how to navigate the mind, learning how the logic of the mind works, how these things happen for a reason. They don't happen in isolation or randomly. And this is where your meditation practice starts to fly, because all of a sudden things start to make sense. You know how to navigate things. And then as we continue, it becomes more and more familiar and more easy to do. We start to recognize things far more easily. And this has a lot of advantages, but also disadvantages at this point, which I'll get to later. But the more and more that we go through, we find we can navigate things. So you find experienced shoppers, they're pushing their shopping trolley and they've got the baby sitting in the front and they've got their shopping list and they're on the phone and they're walking along and navigating all these other shopping trolleys, and they're still grabbing things off the shelves that they need, and they pretty much can do it very, very easily. But the problem can be is you can become mindless. So we're not actually aware of what's going on. And that's a bit of a disadvantage, is that the mindfulness starts to decline. The more and more familiar we are, the easier it is, but we can start to take it for granted. We don't have that interest, that freshness, that as if it's new terrain. It's always an exploration. Every time it's different. But we kind of settle in and close our eyes and everything else, and then 5 minutes later we're just completely bored and disinterested or even falling asleep because it's just not engaging us. It's not, it doesn't hold on to us. But that's how it is in life. And there's lots of ways we can get around that by always having fresh eyes and having new interest in what's going on and not being in so much of a hurry. Because this is a big problem we have in our meditation. A lot of times we're in a huge hurry, which is very understandable in the way we live. Sometimes it's been a very, very busy day. We've had a busy day at work. We come home. We've been facing deadlock in, gridlock in traffic and all these other things, and we barely have a few moments to settle down with peace and quiet, and we've got the kids and we've got jobs we've got to do, and there's no time to really settle down and relax and be peaceful in the meditation. So when if we have our meditation schedule or our favoured pattern of meditating, whatever it can be, is that we sit down and straight away we want to relax and be quiet and still and everything else. And of course that's not going to happen. Slowly. We don't have to be in such a huge hurry. And when we continue our meditation practice, we start to become more familiar with our own needs and how the mind works. Just like we do when we're becoming familiar with a great big shopping centre or hardware store or something like that. We start to be able to learn how we can work within that space. Now, generally, this does have great advantages in your life because things start to settle much more easily. And we start to become aware of these little subtle logics and these subtle patterns in the mind and how they work, so we can handle them much more easily. We can use them for far more benefit. And that is very rewarding. However, when we start to look at the store concept, we start to realize that generally we only see the front of house. So when we go into the shop, we see the aisles of all the groceries and the different displays and everything else, and we just see the front of house. We haven't actually become aware of the back of house. That behind the scenes there's a huge amount going on. There's the supply chain, there's the administration, the management, the security section. all these different, the accounts, all the stuff, the cleaning, the maintenance, all these things going on in the background, which generally, when we go into our shops to do our grocery shopping on the weekend, we've got our list, we know what we want to do, and we just go in and get all our stuff done and go out, and we don't think about anything else. It doesn't even occur to us that it's there. And yet there's this huge army of people behind the scenes that make the company work. In exactly the same way in our meditation, there's a huge amount going on behind the scenes that we're not really aware of. And this is where meditation really starts to take off and becomes far more richer, because all of a sudden you start to see patterns connecting each other. That this section of the company responds to this, and all these things link up. And you see a much bigger picture of the mind and of our life and everything else, and how our entire life has pretty much shaped this moment. Everything we've done in this life builds up and conditions this moment. And that's really profound. And that's really amazing, because that has great potential to improve our own lives, to be a benefit to ourselves and so many others. So when we're also practicing in the meditation, this does slowly come in. And the more calm and still you get, the more and more you do see. And sometimes it just sort of pops up. You might be just busy driving or engaged in work and suddenly something seems a bit clear. It's like the penny drops and there's a connection. You can kind of see what's going on, this bigger picture of how the mind works and all these little connections going on. And that does take a long time, but it's worth it. It's totally worth it. And the thing is, when we start to get more and more into the biggest concept of our company, be it a hardware store, grocery store, or business, we start to find there's this management level. And that starts to get even more interesting, because we've all, seen examples of businesses and corporate management and things like that, and they have their agenda, and they have their vested interests, and they have their plans and everything else, which involve us as sort of the customers, so to speak, but not in ways that we're aware of. So all of a sudden you start to see these patterns come back in the front of house side of the shop. So they place products in certain areas that are more attractive to us. They have displays to lure us in and all these things. And more, both sides, our front of house, we could say our daily life, and sort of the back of house, the deeper part of our mind, is more connected than we realize. We have far more vested interests than we realize. And exploring those becomes very, very revealing. Sometimes a little scary, but very rewarding, because all of a sudden we can see all these things that make us tick in the background. These agendas we have, these vested interests, and these conflicts of interest. And we can start to filter them and evaluate them and explore them and change them. Of course, some are pretty much, they're pragmatic, they're practical. They might not be the best we would want, but, we live in the world, we have to keep our eyes on the ball, and, we can't float around and just do whatever we want, because that causes too much problems in the bigger sense. So we do need to be more aware and engaged. But there's a lot of them which are quite self-destructive, and we don't even realize they're there. And that's a real shock for a lot of people. A lot of our own misery, a lot of our own happiness comes from within. And you can see now that a lot of our happiness and a lot of our well-being also comes from within, from this same place, the same background that we never even are aware of. And once you're in this kind of territory, we could say, this kind of sense of being interested to see how the mind works, how all this fits together, how our day-to-day thoughts and life and our perceptions and our experiences are all conditioned. And we can change that for the better. And this is really where it comes together. Now, I mentioned before, there are sort of disadvantages, and by and large, in my experience, we tend not to talk about this. In fact, in many meditation contexts, we pretty much only talk about the front of house side, how to be more happy and, just to live a little better, live a good life. And we don't talk about this deeper stuff in the background. And it's for a lot of reasons. Sometimes people just aren't really interested. They're going for meditation just to, relax at the end of a busy day. And seriously, if that's what you're in for, fantastic, because it is better than nothing. It does help. But of course, it does take a bit of time. So most people sort of think, well, most people don't really have time to go deeper. They can't spend a lot of time on retreat and do all this kind of stuff. So they don't really talk about it. And it makes sense, but there's that disadvantage that you're kind of missing out. We're not talking about this. So we don't really know where this is heading towards. Meditation kind of becomes this vague thing that we just sit down and what do we do now kind of thing eventually. What direction do we want to take this? All of a sudden this question becomes relevant. What direction do we want to take our life, our meditation practice and everything else? That question now is there and we can act on it. Before, that question wasn't even really available because we just sit down, we're trying to learn how to meditate. There's so many different practices, so many different styles and techniques and methods and so on and so on. And they all have value, but they work for certain characters, certain contexts. They don't work for everybody. So for some people, they find breath meditation fantastic. It's easy. Some people really struggle with it. Some people find metta meditation really easy. Some people, can't find a sniff of, may all beings be happy and well. They really struggle with it. So it's finding exactly what we need, which does come through the practice. Testing and exploring our own situation, our own mind, and seeing how we respond to it. There are times that, meditation may be better in the morning for some better in the evening, some a different style. It's always finding what works. Because unfortunately, it's very successful as a model to be able to teach a standard form of meditation. It's very consistent, it's very easy, and it's kind of safe in a ways that everybody knows more or less what to do. But it can become very mindless. As I mentioned before, we can become very familiar with it. So when we're walking through the grocery store, we're not even aware of all these things going on. We're just pushing our way through and, just grabbing what we need from the shelves and just in and out. There's no real, it's not alive, you could say. It's not engaged or mindful. So there's lots of advantages here. And it's great to be able to have those moments when, just for beginners, this is fine. Just finding our way around. We don't need to go to the deep and meaningful stuff straight away. And indeed, many people don't even want to. I've met quite a few people who are deeply uncomfortable with the idea of being alone with themselves. There's quite a few people that I've met who basically they say, this meditation thing sounds really great and wonderful and everything else, but I can't do that. I just can't sit down, close my eyes and be alone with myself. Not going there. And for a lot of reasons. So a lot of people have to find out what kind of environment they have to deal with. So when they walk into, the store, their mind, we can use many different examples. You could call it a garden, we can call it a home, we can call it all sorts of things. But what state is it in? Is it clean, neat and wonderful? And not for everyone. For lots of people, they're facing very chaotic, very busy, very complex situations. And we have to learn how to navigate that. And softly, softly, we can improve it because we're aware of it. It's like when you have weeds growing in the garden, or, stuff in the fridge which is past its use-by date. We're not even going to deal with it if we're not aware that it's there. It's just going to sit there and rot away, or the weeds will take over the rest of the garden, and that's just the problem. And many of us, of course, are too busy to be able to approach it. But we shouldn't be discouraged or demoralized or feel inferior to it. If anything, this is the great adventure. This is sort of really where it comes in, that we can do so much good just by sitting on our chair or on our meditation cushion, or lying down as you like. Just by doing this, we can start to improve our own life from within. Unfortunately, we find many people, many practitioners, can get stuck because what they're looking for is they're trying to shape the outside world to be perfect. I've met many people who say they have wonderful practice at retreat centres because it's a beautiful place, beautiful people, it's nice and quiet, everybody's there and energized and we're on retreat and the energy's there. And yet they really struggle when they get at home because the energy isn't there, it's not working for them. But this is from inside. That's where it really becomes interested, because we have that conflict of interest. Those vested interests are informing our perception of where we are right now. So we have a vested interest sometimes to not meditate, to not sit, to not relax. That's coming from inside us. And it doesn't exist in isolation. It exists for a reason. Because we have that vested interest there to not relax. We want to be tense and tight, and for many reasons. For some of us, that's a way that we can hold things together. We have this deep fear deep down that if we just relax, everything will fall apart. That we'll lose control of our lives. And so we need to softly, gently show ourselves that that isn't the case. Our life isn't going to fall apart if we relax for a little while. We don't have to be running around trying to fix the outside world to make everything perfect for us to be happy. And that's the problem. But at the same time, once we realize that, it's so liberating. Because we know that there's always going to be chaos in the world. This is what impermanence is about. It's never going to be perfect. Perfection, if there is such a thing, is from inside. That ability to have peace with it, and happiness with it, contentment with it. Just being at ease with it. And that is possible. It can be done. You've met, you see so many monks coming through the Armadale group. You've seen happy monks, and no doubt you've seen happy nuns and other, happy Buddhist practitioners who have been meditating for so long. And you wonder how they do it. What's the secret? What's going on in the background that they're always so happy or energized and, got big smiles and everything else. And most of the time, it's because they've built that good relationship with themselves. They've been able to spend that time to understand themselves, to see how everything fits together in their mind, and to not be afraid to see those really challenging, sometimes scary, vested interests that we have, sometimes ugly parts of ourselves. They're part of us as well. And they need as much metta as everything else. There's no reason that we should exclude them. May all beings be happy. Just not those ones. Unfortunately, that doesn't work. So it's really, really useful in that sense to practice our meditation with a view to looking inwards, to be able to make a good environment in ourselves. And then all of a sudden, these things which used to set us off just don't really matter anymore. And it becomes so much easier. So, by the look of my little clock here, I've been talking for about half an hour. So shall we jump in and get to the good stuff, do the meditation? Am I getting thumbs up? Okay, in which case, let us begin. And as always with meditation, let's start by making ourselves comfortable. If you need to move your posture, please do so. As we sit down, our joints change shape, there might be pressure building up. So spend this movement just moving around as you need to and reset all your posture. And that way we can settle in and make it nice. And then when you're ready, you can close your eyes. And we're still going to use the first few minutes of the meditation just to settle in. With our eyes closed, we can become more aware of our feelings. What is it like to sit in the chair? What do we need to settle in? And use the breath to help us relax. What is the breath like? Is it tense? Is it short? Is it long? It doesn't really matter what it's like, but it's useful to know so we can calm it down. As we chanted in the Metta Sutta, may all beings be at ease, and that includes you. And start by using the breath with every exhale to let go of that tension, any stored up stress. As you breathe in, relax and settle. And as you breathe out, let it go out. And now visit your head and shoulders. And with every breath out, let out any tension. And imagine the breath as relaxing, soothing, releasing any pressure and tension. Let the breath dissolve all those tired knots and aches. And fully relax. And now focus on your chest area and use the breath to relax that area as well. Adjust your posture if you need to. And then relax your arms. Fully at ease. And now relax your back, both your upper back and lower back, to settle into the chair or the cushion. We store so much tension in this body, and now we can let it out, and let it flow out with the breath. Now relax your legs, tired old legs. Now they can settle in. Let go of any tension. And now look at the whole body. Where are we hiding tension away? Is it in our stomach, or deep within our legs, or in our neck? Use the breath to relax it some more. This isn't something we need to hold on to now. Now look at the body again. Is there any new attention that needed? Anything else to relax? And how does this feel? Is this relaxing good or is it not? Is it enjoyable? The mind becomes brighter when it enjoys what it's doing. You have every permission you need to enjoy this, to rest for a little while. And now, use your memory and find a memory of time when you did something good, something that made you happy. It might be something recent or something far in the past. It doesn't matter. It might be a time that you helped someone out, or gave a gift to someone, or you did something special. It doesn't have to be something grand. It can be something simple. For there are many small joys in this world. And as you remember it, re-experience that feeling of happiness. Because all of us, even if we've lived troubled lives, have done some good. There is something there within us that is worth remembering. Something wonderful we have done. And build that happiness, that joy from that memory, and allow it to fill your entire mind. There may be many memories. More may come up, and welcome them into the space. Many small lights make a great bright light. For it's always important to remember that even in our darkest times, these memories are still there. That goodness is still there. And we can call on that anytime. And now remember someone close to you, someone you care about, who has also done good things. Remember a time that you saw something they did that made you happy and that made them happy. And we can remember that that goodness is in us and in them. It's always there. It is wonderful to be happy at the good things we have done and the good things that other people have done. And now remember someone that you're not so close to, someone who you have seen do a kindness, do something special. For that goodness is in them too. And with this happiness that we have built up in our mind, by remembering all the good things we have done and the good things that others have done, spread and share that happiness with everyone that you can. Let it completely fill your heart, where you can store it safely. And so you can remember that goodness is in all of us. And when we're sad or unhappy or frustrated or demoralized and depressed, we can find those moments of happiness. We can always remember the good we have done and the good that others have done. And now when you're ready, you can open your eyes. We alive?
Yes, we are. We're just coming back after a very blissful meditation. Thank you. Thank you, Venerable. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
We have a little message for you, Venerable. Brilliant teaching. This is from Alyssa in Florida, who has just left. Brilliant teaching, as always. Thank you. She has a question, if you would like to hear the question, Venerable. Would that be okay?
Of course.
Oh, I thought it might be. All right. In meditation, we take interest in the present experience of the breath. I find that I can default to an interest in the expectation of qualities and disruptions. This awareness is the practice? Yes or no? Can you please offer some gentle guidance on gently re-guiding interest back to the breath and away from the expectation of qualities and the 10,000 types of thought disruptions that occur with a smile? And so she's signing off with a smile, Alyssa.
It's a very good question. And it actually it brings us close back to what we're talking about, is that a lot of the expectations we have are vested interests. We have deep inside that expectation which derails the entire process. And a lot of the time we have all this inattention, all these things that we're holding on to. It's like an agenda we have to hold on to things, to keep things together, because sometimes there is fear of relaxing. Sometimes there's fear of fading away. Sometimes there's also this fear that, oh, we're not meditating if we're relaxing, or I might fall asleep and waste my time. Some of us, quite honestly, need to take a nap if you've had a very busy day, or you've had a lot of stress that you need to deal with. please take a nap. It can be far more productive to meditate after the nap. But to deal with all these things does take time, because we need to see these vested interests and these conflicts of interests, these different parts of our mind that demand this and need this, and they're clashing with each other because they can't agree, they can't prioritize each other because they're different parts. Like in our analogy of our store, they're different departments that aren't agreeing with each other and aren't communicating with each other. And so that interest comes in when we start to see, oh, we can connect these things together. We can bring all these parties together. We can bring them to the table. And they can be part of it. We can relax those things too. A lot of the time, when we feel these pressures, these expectations, these 100,000 thoughts and feelings and all these things that we should be doing and da-da-da-da-da, and we feel that they're important, we prioritize them. And a lot of the time we've been taught to prioritize them. We have these feelings, oh, I must take this seriously, this thing's come up. Or, some people who've been practicing many, many years have these pop-up thoughts of things which are kind of ugly, kind of not very spiritual. And they feel depressed or demoralized or disappointed that they've been meditating 20, 30 years and these thoughts still come up. But these thoughts don't come up in isolation. There are all these things in the background, the back of house of the mind. Calling it the subconscious, you can kind of deal with that, but actually when you start meditating you realize the subconscious is pretty shallow, it's pretty easy to access, it's not something far distant. It really is part of our daily life. And so by being aware that they're there opens the door for us to be able to work with them. We don't have to be afraid of them. We're not inferior to them, for better or worse, whatever they are. They can be part of the whole process because they're part of us. If we turn them into the enemy and try to destroy them, try to make them go away, I don't want you. I want to be nice, still and quiet. Thoughts go away. Well, of course that's not going to work because we're shutting out, we're excluding part of ourselves in that process. And that just never works. So in the context with the meditation, certainly slowly, but building that interest comes in recognizing how big this is. Not in a daunting sense, but how big and how open it is, and how fascinating it is to see how all these things connect together, how it all works, how we think in positive ways that give benefit to ourselves and positive results, and at the same time, how we don't, how we have these old patterns that basically hinder us. And seeing that for yourself really takes things forward. So a very good question, but it's getting that sense of just, wow, what we can do with this, how wonderful this can be. And that's really the foundation of it. So I hope that helps. But if there's any more questions...
Sorry, Venerable. Yes, definitely. I'm sure Alyssa will be listening to the podcast after the session, and she will pass her comments then. Unfortunately, she had to go early, so she's left the question for us.
Yeah, no problem.
We have a comment from Becky. Sorry to have to leave now. Thank you, Venerable Sampa, for beautiful guided meditation. Wishing you all a fabulous evening. Now, Avinash in India has got a question for you. Dear Venerable, so we shall not just sit and meditate, but do contemplation, also what is working for us and what is not. We must do smart meditation, but keeping a gentle balance. What about getting over the perfectionist mind to maintain 5 precepts?
Ah, yes. That perfectionist mind, again, that's a vested interest. We have an agenda to be perfectionist. We have this desire to fulfill a spiritual practice perfectly, never to do anything wrong. And that is a form of control. And that has to, in a sense, we have to relax that. Because this isn't heaven. We live in a world where a lot of the time we can't fulfill the 5 precepts perfectly. We can only do our best. And that's what's important, that integrity of doing our best, of recognizing that we can't always have things perfectly because the world doesn't work that way. We can't control it, even as much as we want to. And that is very liberating as well, because all of a sudden it changes from, oh, I must keep the 5 precepts perfectly and never ever do any mistakes, I must never make any bad karma, and so on and so on. And that just entraps us. That doesn't help us develop good qualities, because it just keeps us trapped in this agenda, this vested interest to be perfect. Sometimes it's because we have this fear of what might happen, what might go wrong. We have a fear of making bad karma. We have a fear of other people judging us. We have a fear that, oh, my whole practice is falling apart, or I've never developed anything if I'm thinking negatively or still following these thoughts. It doesn't work that way. Kindness and compassion comes in. And this is really what it's all about. The moment we start to see how complicated these situations are, the kindness, the compassion, everything else really becomes relevant. It becomes a daily life thing because it just is a sensible way to live. We have some traffic in the background, but so when we look at it, the perfectionist approach, we can sort of see, is this a good thing? Has this helped us develop beneficial things? And sometimes it hasn't. So we don't have to take it quite so seriously. We don't have to be so hard on ourselves for not being perfect. Because that's kind of the thing, is that inside of us we're very hard on ourselves, so we need to be perfect so we don't have to be hard on ourselves. There's that inner judgment going on that we're trying to avoid. And we don't have to do that. So that's where the meditation helps, is that we can relax. We don't need to be perfect. The world is not going to fall apart if we're not perfect. And, people aren't going to blame us for the world falling apart if we're not perfect. It doesn't matter so much. And that's what's very liberating. And that helps a lot. So, in a sense, being more engaged in a meditation does help us to calm the situation down, but we're also more alive to the situation. And we recognize what we need. If we try to be perfect, it creates tension, doesn't it? Is that your experience? We find that straight away. If we go into the meditation, we feel that we have to sit full lotus with perfectly upright spine and all the rest of it. You are going to have a pretty miserable time. And you're not actually going to get anywhere because you're just basically fighting yourself all the time. You can calm it down. So I hope that helps. Enjoy it more.
Would someone else like to make a comment? Unmute themselves and make a comment or ask a question?
Like to make a comment, please?
Oh, that would be lovely, Yuri. Thank you.
I only noticed when you think about, also coming back to the comment just from India with the perfection, is it not that we have been, our whole life, it has been drummed in us, we need to be perfect, we need to do this, we need to do that. Then you arrive at the spiritual path, and that it's exactly the opposite. And I think this is exactly why we are so shocked with a lot of things, isn't it?
Yes. Very
Because
much.
our whole life, this is what I currently feel, everything I achieved, not achieved, did, not did. It's completely now the opposite if you are looking at it from the Buddhist way, you know. And that's quite strange, isn't it? And I think this is the problem. We have to let go of our construction, building site, or however you call it.
And this is the problem. That's that vested interest we have. We are conditioned from childhood, and we're told you have to be perfect in your school exams and everything else because you want to go to university, you want to get a job, you have to be perfect, you have to, raising the bar endlessly. And, there's so much competition in the world. So there's sort of times where you can see, okay, there's a relevant pragmatic there, but it just goes too far. And then we start to blame ourselves the moment we make the tiniest little mistake or that it didn't go to plan. Something happened and, we are the failure, apparently, because we weren't perfect. And that is crippling. It really is.
Exactly. This is our society, isn't it? If you are not playing the game, then you are a failure. And people are not seeing that you have a valid point because it's so going against their conditioning, thinking, way of life.
Yeah. And that's the thing as well, is that conditioning is as such a vested interest. It expresses ourselves as an agenda that underlies everything we do in life and comes up in our meditation. Sometimes more clearly in our meditation, which is a big advantage because we can work with it more obviously. We can see it very clearly because there it is. But the thing is, we have to softly, because it's so entrenched, it's such a strong habit way of thinking, it's not going to give up easily. It's not just going to say, okay, fine, we'll just let go and everything will be great. No, it's got terrible fear of being imperfect and it's all going to fall apart. And that's where we bring in the loving kindness. We bring in that compassion that we don't have to do that. We bring in other things like the joy and the acceptance and everything else. And the wisdom that there's times that we do need to work, we do need to do our best. We have work commitments and everything else. Of course, if we just do whatever we want, we'll probably get sacked and fired. So there's times that we need to be more aware, but at the same time, when we come into our meditation, that all of a sudden is a hindrance, and we don't need to have it. And it's such a relief to experience that moment where you're going, oh, I don't need it. I don't have to be perfect here. No one's going to care if I'm just sort of lazing back or, how I sit or what posture I have. It completely doesn't matter. And that frees us up and we can enjoy the moment in the meditation, which brightens the mind and helps us live a good life. Because that perfection, it's a killer. But, it's there, it's for us to work with. And that's the whole advantage of this bigger awareness of the mind and how all these different parts of the mind work together and come together and how this might have a vested interest here which might conflict with this part of the mind and their conflict, and we can calm that down. It's like dealing with children, that might be fighting over who gets the TV remote or who gets to sit on the computer and play on the internet. And we sort of say, it doesn't matter so much. We can sort it out. So, the perfectionism, it's there, it's very common, and it's certainly part of our culture, but we don't need to follow it all the time. And that's what the freedom is. So, hope that helped.
Thank you.
Fiona has left a comment for you, Venerable. She says that she enjoyed your example of the supermarket, the hardware.
Mm-hmm.
It made perfect sense to her, and thank you, Venerable. Personally, I find that supermarkets are the horror of perfection. I really don't enjoy them because they really go out of their way to deaden our experiences, in my mind. But your picture helped me work with my mind very, very beautifully. So thank you for that, Venerable. Is there anybody else who would like to make a comment? Or
This is Martha. Do we have time for a question? Just a quick question.
Of course.
I think we do. Martha would love one. Yes.
Talking about perfection, I'm always trying to do it just right. When we were doing that meditation, we went from self, and I love that. It's so good about finding the memory of when we did something well. It does bring up happiness. That generates happiness in me. And then watching them who I care about, those who I care about. And then I got to that third part, and I'm having problems with this so badly. I cannot generate. I'm having a real hard time generating loving kindness, generating that. When you said bring up that third person, someone who's not close to you, and see them doing kindnesses and special things, it's very hard. I literally feel in my heart that these people not only did hurt me on purpose, I feel in my heart that they are so shallow that even when they do things for others, there's no way they're actually doing it for them. Even for their own children, they're doing it for their own purposes so they can avoid things that irritate them. So they're doing things for others so they can make themselves feel that. I literally feel that there's at least 5 people that I know of that have no depth because they are not in touch with that part of them that is there but haven't done it. They've never ever known anything other than trying to do kind things or things that appear kind for others in an effort to just make their own personal lives easier. So what can I do when I'm trying to do this very thing? I felt great, I'm feeling great, I'm able to, feel happiness about what I've done, what I've seen people do that are not my enemy, quote unquote. Just that's for lack of a better term. I don't really have it. But what can I do about that when I get that third part? When I literally don't think those people have goodness in them. And these are not people who are in jail, but they should be.
Compassion is a very important point because they are destroying themselves. The way they live, if they are living self-centered, very selfishly, and aren't doing good for for genuine reasons, they are creating nothing but misery for themselves and their future. It's a very, very lonely existence. And it's very unfulfilling because they will never find happiness through doing that. They're just running up, there's certainly many, many cases where they're just doing it to find their own sort of selfish happiness. But we all know from ourselves, does that work? Do we find happiness in ourselves by following that superficial, selfish, miserable way of life? Of course we don't. And yet that's the path that they've chosen. And that's where we have the compassion for them. So in a sense, by recognizing that we have the ability to do good, and that the people we love have the ability to do good and kindnesses and everything else, it's in them too. It just might be very, very deep and they're not aware of it and they're not accessing it, but it is there. They have the potential of finding it if they, of course, practiced. And of course, many of them never will because they're not exposed to this. But that's where the compassion comes in, because now they're trapped in this cycle that's only going to create more superficiality, more misery, more frustration and disappointment. And that's going to affect the people around them. So our heart has to change subtly. Instead of celebrating that potential, if we can, of course, recognize that potential and that brings us happiness, then do that. That's fantastic. That is moving in the right direction, that we can recognize that it is in them. even if it's buried so very deep. But if we can't do that, we recognize compassion is the way to approach this, because they are destroying themselves.